And just for the recording one more time, welcome to the third GSDSEF SLB workshop called Achieving STEM Career Success, Presenting Your Findings and Research. So before we start, I'd like us to do some SLB introductions. So hello, everyone. My name is Kavya Gupta. I'm a senior at Westview High School, and this is my fourth year in the science fair, and my previous categories were environmental sciences and computational biology.
I'm Monis. I'm a senior at Canyon Crest Academy, and I've been doing the science fair for 3 years. And the categories I've competed in were biochemistry and computational biology.
My name is Arnav. I'm a freshman at CCA as well, and I've been in computer science, and this is my third year.
I'm Spencer. I'm a sophomore at SDJA. This is my third year, and I've competed in behavioral and social sciences.
Okay, so before we begin here, I just wanted to go over some announcements that you guys should keep in mind. Just as a reminder, the safety screening deadline is December 31st. So be sure to get in your safety screening confirmations beforehand. You will need your teacher advisor's confirmation as well as your project abstract or proposal, and you should be filling out the safety screening before you start your project. So this is very important so that you can start collecting data and start working on your project. All and any of the other fair updates are on the website. So if you have any questions, that would be one of your first places that you should go to refer to. And just as a reminder, our fair website is gsdsef.org. If you want to have any updates and continuous updates on the workshops, on some announcements about GSDSEF, about the mentorship programs, please do follow us on Instagram as well as our YouTube channel, in which we'll be posting our recordings for our workshops as well as different safety screening and applying tutorials. So we have a lot of resources out there for all you students. So definitely please do use these resources. They are very helpful. And of course, if you still have any questions besides that, you can email us at gsdsefslb@gmail.com. So our general agenda for today is we'll be going over what exactly is data analysis and why we use it. In addition, we'll be talking about the importance of using the right type of graph or analysis for a certain type of project. And then we'll go over what are the important parts of a good figure and how to talk about them. And then lastly, we'll wrap up with demonstrations and project-specific advising. And depending on how much interest we have, we'll either break out in different rooms or we'll just work in the main room. But that is depending on how many people are interested in having question and answers.
So in the last workshop, we covered how to write the hypothesis, problem statement, materials, and methods section of your report. In this workshop, we'll cover how to make figures and discuss your results, which are essentially the middle part of your report. The next workshop will cover all of the finishing touches on a complete report, including the conclusion, appendix, and abstract sections, of which you write last, but the abstract goes at the beginning of your report. That will be explained more next week. We highly recommend following the structure of your notebook as well. And you can find a sample of what this looks like on the website. So today, though, we're going to be focusing on the results and the data sections. So let's start with how you should actually organize your data. Remember to organize all your numerical data in tables. And this can be easily done using software such as Excel or Google Sheets. Because with that data, once they're in tables, you'll also want to make it graphable. You want to create graphs from your data, which we'll explain in the next few slides. But qualitative data, such as like photos and observations, should be kept neatly so you can easily refer and compare them. And then these photos or these observations, this qualitative data, will go in the appendix. So you'll want to keep it nice and neat, and we'll cover how to make an appendix in our next workshop. So make sure you save all your data, even pre-trials, and even if you think it's useless, you may want it later, or come back to it and make some interesting suggestions in your discussion for future work or reasoning behind your experiment, or it could potentially be something that you would want to include in your appendix. So here are the basic steps for you to do in order to analyze your data. First, you'll want to make sure that you organize your data neatly and sort of graph out the values. And then next, you'll want to make sure that you observe your graphs and calculate some general values, such as like the mean, median, mode, to make sure that you can easily interpret your findings. And then lastly, you'll want to discuss sort of what your graphs tell and relate them back to your problem statement and hypothesis to make them relevant in your sort of report. But ultimately, your data should be answering the main question that you're posing, the problem that you're posing, and supporting or disproving your hypothesis. Sometimes you can be fooled by looking at like raw data and making incorrect assumptions that the data does or doesn't support the hypothesis. Make sure you follow these steps for graphing, organizing, interpreting your data, because you may miss out on important information that could be like very crucial in your project report. So now let's talk about what actually makes a good figure or graph or table. So if you just look at these tables, what would you do to improve them? Like here we have a ton of charts, but what kind of conclusions and correlations can we like easily observe by just looking at these tables? So like, for example, in the first table, which one of these costs is related to the other? What kinds of trends are happening? So for many of these questions, of course, it's kind of difficult to answer them within a couple of seconds because the data is just so disorganized. But the reality is that real data looks like this. Like charts are numbers that it can take some time to go through if you don't organize the data and search thoroughly for answers to your hypotheses. So the main point we have in looking at these unorganized data that we have you guys looking at is to show that it's hard to extrapolate results instantly from very unorganized charts. Obviously, they're important for analyzing data, but they can't tell your audience anything within a quick glance or a couple of seconds at just looking at the charts. So it's also difficult for you to parse out exactly what's going on and how this exactly relates to your experiment. Yeah. So we want to make that chart a bit better. So we used an organized table. So the first step is to organize your data in very clean tables. So the data here, as you can see, it's very organized, as in, you have within each column, for instance, on the first column, the dollar amount, the amounts are going down in order of value, whereas that differed from the chart. This table is sometimes hard to read in the other columns, and it's missing a lot of important information for anyone to interpret. So one of the key mistakes of many projects is forgetting to label your tables and graphs. So an improvement for this table specifically would be to label it, perhaps organize the data in a better way, and things of that nature. So you can draw easy conclusions and interpret your data in a better way so that not only yourself, but your judges can also understand your experiment better.
All right, so here's an example of a proper table. First, we have descriptive tiles for each of the columns. Next, each data or point or column is labeled with the right units. The units typically go next to the title of the column or within each value. Lastly, the appropriate decimal places have been used for these numbers, as money is measured to the hundredths place. Make sure you have these things for every table you put in your appendix. Next, take a look at this figure. Is this a good figure? Ask yourself, what are they measuring here? What's the difference between the series? What's the difference between the numbers on the x-axis and the y-axis? A good figure should be able to tell a good part of your story without you doing much explaining. Theoretically, you could present the main conclusions of your project with just the figures. They are a visual story of your work. Here is the same figure, but with a little more information that makes all the difference. We have a descriptive, captions, and title, which tells us what the experiment is about. This can be in sentence case, a concise sentence of what conclusion you're drawing from the graph. Next, we have a legend for defining the colors that have been provided. Also, the color scheme makes it easy for us to tell the difference between species 1 and species 2. However, you don't want too many colors, and you don't want to make the colors look really similar to each other. Next, we also have the axes, which have been labeled with the proper units. Again, labeling is one of the most common mistakes at the science fair, so be sure to include all the relevant details. Lastly, make sure you have uniformly spaced numbers on your axes. All right. So now we're going to do a little exercise here where we'll explore data tables and graphs. Data analysis is a very important part of science, and here we want to effectively show you why we have to graph and what conclusions we can make from looking at them. We'll be taking you through what graphs for what data, why it's important to know that, and what they mean. Here's the first chart, where we have the temperature and cost of 3 things. What kind of graph do you think this might be?
You can put your answers in the chat on what graph you think this data would most fit.
So like some examples of graphs are line graphs or bar graphs. So, okay, a bar graph could be one way to graph it. So another way you could graph this is with the line graph, which is really useful for showing off trends in the data, like you can see on the right. So be sure to describe the relationship between the temperature and the sales, the independent and dependent variable, and also be able to recognize when there doesn't seem to be a relationship, like with the cake in this example. Next, we have some kind of metric with species and time. What kind of graph would be suited for this? So again, you can put your answers in the chat. Yes, a line is also a great way to do it. So here we could use a scatter plot or a line graph. I saw a scatter plot for the one before this. And here we've plotted it as a scatter plot with lines connecting the dots, making it a combination of both the options. This graph is useful when you have individual data points, and especially for plotting change over time or a large sample size with many data points. The results could be something like this. Species 1 has an exponential growth and surpasses species 2 population at 10.5 hours, as shown in the highlighted text.
So here's yet another table. So what do you think this one could be? I think it was mentioned earlier. Any guesses? Or pie's not bad. But here I think we're going to use a bar graph. So a bar graph best suits this data because there are multiple categories paired with numbers. So that's the main distinction between bar and pie. So bar graphs are good for categories, frequencies, and sometimes percentages. And then here we can get a really clear interpretation that algebra and physics are the most popular subjects, with 50 students composing about 10% of all the students. Now, what graph would best suit this data? You got it this time. So this would be really good for a pie chart because it has percentages for fewer categories. So in addition, percentages by definitions are parts of a whole, which is represented best by a pie chart. So binary or yes and or no data is also best represented as a pie chart. And then here we can clearly see that 51% of people ranked the experience 2 and below. And then the most frequent response was 0 with 36%. And there are some more complicated graphs. I think we might go over that in next week's workshop, which is more advanced. But if you ever want to reach out to us about these kinds of graphs, I think you can find our email in the the GSDSEF website. And then also, we're just going to quickly review some common mathematical values that most students use to summarize their data. So this is an average, also known as a mean. So we're going to take our data, and then we want to know our average. So we take the number of students per subject. Well, we want to know the average of the number of students per subject. So we take the sum of the number of students divided by the number of classes. So you can add up 18 plus 21 plus 29, etc., and then divide by 12 for each class. And then with a little math, we find that there's an average about 34 students per class. And then taking this same data, now we want to find the percentage of students in Spanish during the period that the survey was taken. Percent is the number of students we're interested in divided by the total number of students multiplied by 100%. We find that the 44 students in Spanish represent about 11% of all students during this period. During the breakout room sessions, we might go over a little bit of this and maybe use Excel or Google Sheets, but we'll see what everyone wants. Maybe just do question answer kind of thing. And then finally, we're going to go over summarizing, reviewing, and interpreting results. Now that we have all this data analysis and techniques, we're going to think about what this actually means.
Okay, and then we can also answer the question in the chat as we go along with this. But so in science, it's very important to understand the difference between your results and your discussion, although they do go in hand. So your results will only be the facts that describe your charts and will likely be describing the numerical aspects of the data. But in contrast, your discussion expands upon your results and then it interprets them in the context of your prior research and opinions. So you might be wondering, when you're creating your project notebook, how and what should you put in these two different sections? So remember, results, think of numbers, and then discussions, think of how you're going to interpret those numbers and what do those values mean. So you can attempt to explain why something happened the way it did or what an outlier might mean. But in addition, you should also connect your results to your hypotheses and explain how it supports or rejects your initial predictions. So this is really important because you want to show the judges and whoever is reading your project what was the result of your hypotheses, correct? So this is something that you can do in your conclusion or your discussion sections. So like we've been speaking about, your results are all about identifying what's going on in the results. So the following values, such as the mean, median, mode, standard deviation, or standard error, can also all be very useful in summarizing general trend. So make sure you compare across the trials for precision and contrast various conditions to investigate hypotheses. Again, if you want to be a very thorough scientist or engineer, you want to show that your results can be reproduced as well as your results have some value to the meaning. If anyone's just looking at and reading some numbers, they won't understand what's the meaning of your results. So you provide these different statistical analyses to help identify as well as analyze your results. If you guys have any questions on how to calculate any of these, such as the mean, median, mode, standard deviation, we do have some videos on our YouTube channel that describe how to use things like Google Sheets as well as Excel's or Microsoft Excel to calculate these. But if you also would like to see a live example at the end of these slide presentations, you can also stay behind and we can do that as well. So when you're reviewing your results, you need to review your data and look at the results with a critical eye. So you should ask yourself these questions. Do you have enough data? What information does the data you collected tell you? What trends or patterns do you see? Did you get the results you expected? Or if you have unexpected results, try to figure out why. Was there a problem with your hypotheses or did you make a mistake? Remember, all results are meaningful data. Even if you think that the results might not be good, they have some sort of a meaning because you can use those results to figure out what you did wrong and what are some components of your project or methodology that you should try to change to maybe get better results. So in the results section, you will need to use purely objective observations. So this is a surefire way to summarize exactly what you see and make sure to keep the word I out of it and your own opinions. Remember, the results are the raw data. If you have some sort of like a bias in your results, then that wouldn't validate them. You want to make sure the results are objective. So even if you're sure that something happened because due to something you read about before, those opinions can go into your discussion or your conclusion. The reason being is that you take your past knowledge as well as your literature review knowledge and your results knowledge to help interpret the results. So that information all goes in your discussion. Again, if you have any questions about the differences between the discussion and results sections, you can also ask us. Maybe even some of you may have specifics to your project. So here are some examples or some sample statements on how you can summarize your results. So the most frequent or least response was given and then you give a certain number, or the difference between blank and blank was a certain percentage or a unit of measurement. The average of some variable was another number. The graph showed this, some variable increased or decreased by some other unit of measurement and so on. So as you can see, using these units of measurements in your statements is important, and make sure you use it as appropriate. So you don't want to be talking about an average and give some sort of a category instead of a numerical value. So you need to make sure your statements are accurate and meaningful. So here are some examples of some statements that can help summarize the results in your writing. So the most frequent response for 35th grade students was 3 hours per day for TV viewing with an average of 2.8 hours. So as you can see, the variable that they are measuring, I guess, is how many 5th grade students view TV, what's the average of these 5th grade students watching TV? Another example could be the untreated control plates grew on an average of 43.25 plus minus 29.1 CFUs, or the zinc oxide plates also grew on an average of a certain value. Then you can combine and compare them as well. There are a few more examples. You can read through them and you can see how each one of them have keywords to help analyze and show which statistical analysis value will you be providing in that statement. So there's the average, there's difference, there's comparison. So all those key vocabulary words help you with that. Okay, so those were all of our slides for today about data analysis. And again, these were our basic data analysis slides. So if you have any questions about how to calculate any of these statistical analysis values, what are the differences between results and discussions pages, how to create a graph, any labeling your graphs. You can let us know. You can stay behind right now. But if you want to learn more about data analysis, our next workshop is workshop number 4, or advanced data analysis, and that is in 1 week. It's 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. I also sent out the sign-up link for that workshop to students who have participated in the past before, and I can resend it to any new students that joined us as well if you are interested. The Zoom link we will be sending out shortly in a few days as we get our final head count for the students that will be joining. But if you're interested, you can also join for the advanced data analysis workshop. As for right now, please do stick behind. We can answer any of your questions as well as go over any example creating data sets with our Excel and Google Sheets examples.